This isn't just a story. It's a true story. They say a mother can do anything to protect her child. But today, you'll see how far that can really go. This murder took place in the U.S. state of Michigan, where a mother's love turned into a killing. They used to say, when love crosses its limits, it becomes destruction. This isn't just a story of murder. It's a story of a mother's blind love, a son's obsession, and a young girl's shattered dreams. Let me tell you how far a mother can go for her child, and when love stops being love and turns into obsession. In Riverton, Michigan, the nights are usually still. Porch lights glow like tiny moons, and the only sounds after dusk are passing cars on cracked asphalt and the occasional dog barking somewhere down the block. From the outside, it looks peaceful, a place where people wave from their driveways, where nothing truly terrible ever happens. But peace can be a mask. And behind one of those porch lights, in a small gray brick house at the edge of town, a secret was waiting to breathe. 17-year-old Lana Thomas had been restless for weeks. Spring break was almost over, and she talked constantly about the future: college, travel, maybe nursing school. Her friends said she was sunshine in motion, laughing easily, always taking photos, always planning something. But whenever the topic of her boyfriend came up, her voice dimmed. Jaylen Parker was 23, older, protective in ways that sometimes felt more like control than care. He'd been charming once, the kind of boy who showed up with flowers and inside jokes. Lately, though, he called too much, asked too many questions, and didn't like it when she didn't answer right away. On April 5th, just before 6 in the evening, Lana's sister drove her across town to Jaylen's house. She'd promised she wouldn't stay long. Just clearing the air, she'd said. The sisters hugged in the car, a small laugh hanging between them. The door closed, the engine faded away, and the street swallowed the sound. That was the last time anyone saw Lana Thomas alive. When her messages stopped delivering that night, her mother tried to stay calm. Maybe her phone battery had died again. Maybe she'd stayed with a friend. But by morning, the excuses had worn thin. Her room was still untouched, bed made, charger still plugged in, her weekend bag by the dresser. By noon, panic had already replaced reason. The missing person report went out the same afternoon. Officers canvassed the neighborhood, tracing the short drive from Lana's home to Jaylen's address on the north side of Riverton. When detectives knocked, Carla Parker, Jaylen's 49-year-old mother, opened the door. She looked polite, even welcoming, the kind of mother who might hand you lemonade while you wait. Jaylen appeared moments later, eyes tired but steady. She came by, yeah, he told police. We talked a bit, but she left before dark. Said she needed space. He shrugged like a man rehearsing nonchalance. Carla nodded beside him, adding, she seemed fine when she left. The conversation ended with a few notes in a detective's pad and a handshake at the door. Yet as they walked back to the cruiser, one officer turned to the other. You smell that? He whispered. A faint tang of bleach drifted out of an open window. 2 days later, Riverton was plastered with flyers. Missing, Lana Thomas, 17. Her school friends organized a search party. Neighbors checked sheds and empty lots. At the Thomas home, the phone kept ringing. Reporters, volunteers, strangers with theories. Her mother barely slept. Every call that wasn't Lana's voice felt like a small death. Detective Marissa Holt took over the case on the 4th day. She'd seen disappearances before, runaways, custody disputes, the occasional tragic accident. But something about this one felt wrong from the start. Too neat, too quiet. She went back to the Parker's house with a warrant for phone data. Jaylen said his phone was missing. Carla said their security cameras had stopped working the week before. Holt made note of both statements. That night, Jaylen carried 2 heavy black trash bags to the curb long after midnight. A neighbor's door camera captured him glancing around before tossing them into the bin. By dawn, the garbage truck had already rolled through. Days bled into weeks. The air in Riverton grew thicker with rumor. Some said Lana had run away with a secret boyfriend. Others whispered that Jaylen had been acting strange, pacing outside at odd hours, covering the basement windows with old blankets. Carla told neighbors her son was heartbroken, that people were cruel for suspecting him. "He's a good boy," she kept saying. He'd never hurt her. Detective Holt didn't believe her. She pulled cell tower records. On the night of April 5th, Lana's phone had pinged near the Parkers' address at exactly 7:41 p.m. 3 minutes later, Jaylen's phone went offline for the next 6 hours. When it came back online, its location had shifted 15 miles west. Near the industrial edge of Fairmont, a neighboring city dotted with warehouses and empty lots. Holt requested surveillance footage from the Fairmont toll cameras. At 8:27 p.m., a black SUV matching Carla Parker's license plate crossed the county line. It returned at 9:12. The vehicle's windows were fogged from inside. Still, evidence without a body is only suspicion. By April 20th, the investigation hit a wall. The media moved on. The flyers began to curl under spring rain. Holt stayed late most nights, staring at the crime board. Maps, photos, phone charts, strings of red connecting them like veins. In the center, Lana's school portrait, smiling, eyes bright, frozen in a world that no longer existed. Then came the tip. A man who sometimes did maintenance work for Carla Parker called the station. She'd asked him weeks earlier to help move a heavy sealed bin into her SUV. Said it was old storage. He'd refused because of the smell, sweet and chemical, like decay masked by cleanser. The next morning, Holt dispatched units to canvass parking lots across Fairmont. It was a security guard who found it, a black SUV, abandoned behind a closed grocery store. Its windows fogged, dust on the hood. When he peered through the glass, he saw a plastic storage bin wedged behind the seats, lid taped tight. Detectives pried open the lid. The smell hit first, dense, metallic, unforgettable. Inside lay the remains of a young woman wrapped in layers of blankets. Her hair still held traces of rose-scented shampoo. Lana Thomas had been found. Detective Holt stood motionless beside the vehicle as the rain fell. She had imagined this moment differently. A rescue, not recovery. Around her, the flashing lights painted everything red and blue, the colors of emergency and grief. The medical examiner's report later confirmed asphyxia. The bruising pattern suggested the killer's hands had lingered, the act slow, deliberate. The time of death matched the night she disappeared. When Holt returned to the Thomas home, Lana's mother answered before the knock was complete. The words barely left Holt's lips before the woman's knees gave way. The scream that followed was the kind that empties a house. Across town, the Parkers' lights stayed off. But detectives were already watching. Just before dawn, they moved in. Inside the living room, Jaylen sat at the kitchen table, his hands flat, eyes distant. Carla paced behind him, whispering something he couldn't hear. The knock on the door echoed like thunder through the quiet house. When it opened, Detective Holt met Jaylen's eyes. "We need to talk." He didn't answer. Carla stepped forward, her voice trembling. "Please," she said, "whatever you think happened, you don't understand. I was only trying to protect my son." Holt nodded once. "Then you can both explain it downtown." The interrogation room was cold, intentionally so. A single light buzzed above the metal table, throwing long shadows on the gray walls. Jaylen Parker sat hunched forward, his hands cuffed, fingers tapping restlessly. Across from him, Detective Marissa Holt watched in silence, a recorder blinking red between them. Hours had passed since the arrest. The house had been quiet when the team entered. Too quiet. Everything smelled faintly of bleach, the air thick with chemical sharpness. Downstairs, in the basement, they found plastic wrap, duct tape, and gloves, all freshly used. And a single piece of jewelry, half buried under the laundry machine, a small silver ring, Lana's initials engraved inside. Jaylen stared at that ring now, as Holt placed it gently on the table. "Recognize this?" she asked. His jaw tightened. A flicker of emotion crossed his face. Not guilt, but something like fear. Then he looked away. "She gave it to you," Holt continued, voice calm, deliberate. "On your birthday. March 2nd, remember?" Jaylen's eyes lifted for a second, then dropped again. "She was alive when she came to your house," Holt said softly. "So what happened next?" The silence stretched. The hum of the air vent filled the space. Finally, Jaylen whispered, "You wouldn't understand." Holt leaned forward. "Try me." He looked up, eyes rimmed red. "She said she was leaving me," he said. His voice cracked. "Said she'd found someone else, that she was done." He swallowed hard. I couldn't let her walk out like that. Not after everything." There it was, the first truth, sharp and small, like a splinter breaking skin. But Holt didn't interrupt. "She let the quiet pull him further. She started screaming," he said. "I just wanted her to stop. To listen, I didn't mean to—" His words trailed off, fading into a sound that wasn't quite a sob, wasn't quite a breath. "And then Mom came downstairs." Holt's eyes narrowed slightly. "Your mother was there?" Jaylen nodded, face in his hands. "She saw what happened. She told me we couldn't call anyone, that no one would believe it was an accident. She said she'd fix it." Across the hallway, Carla Parker sat in another room, older, calmer, but her fingers wouldn't stop moving, tracing invisible circles on the tabletop. When detectives entered, she offered a polite smile. "The kind you give to neighbors, not officers holding murder charges." "I know why I'm here," she said before they could even begin. One detective nodded. "Then why don't you tell us what happened, Carla?" She exhaled slowly, her voice low, almost trembling. He panicked. "My son's not a bad person. He made a mistake." "What kind of mistake buries a child in a bin?" The detective shot back. Carla's eyes flickered, a mix of anger and sorrow. "You have children?" she asked. He didn't answer. "When you're a mother," she whispered, "you do anything to protect them, anything." Music deepens, soft cello rising in the background. According to her statement, when she came downstairs that night, Lana was already gone, lying still on the floor, her skin pale, eyes open. Jaylen was shaking, mumbling words she couldn't understand. Carla said she screamed his name, tried to wake the girl, but nothing changed. Then she realized the truth, and something inside her shut down. She told detectives she cleaned the floor, wrapped the body, and helped her son move it to the garage. For 2 days, she said, they couldn't think clearly. They planned to turn themselves in, but fear grew faster than courage. That's when Carla came up with a plan, to hide the evidence, to buy them time. She bought a large plastic bin from a local store, sealed it with duct tape, and stored it in the back of her SUV. Then she called a handyman she trusted, asking him to help her move old storage boxes. The man refused when he smelled something wrong. That small decision, one man's instinct to walk away, would later become the break Detective Holt needed. When Carla finished her statement, she folded her hands in her lap. "I know what I did was wrong," she said softly. "But I did it for him." "A mother protects her child." The detective nodded slowly. "Even from murder charges?" Her lips quivered, especially from those. Outside the interrogation rooms, Detective Holt leaned against the wall, exhaustion heavy in her shoulders. She'd seen killers before, men without remorse, women with cold precision. But this was something darker, something twisted around love, a mother's instinct turned into a weapon. The next day, the news broke. Mother and son charged in death of 17-year-old girl found in SUV. It spread fast. Local channels, social media, talk shows. Lana's face was everywhere again, but now beside headlines that made the world stop for a moment. At Riverton High, teachers cried in hallways. Her friends brought candles, left letters outside the school gate. One note read, "You deserved forever." As the case built momentum, the prosecutor's office released new details. Forensic analysis confirmed traces of Lana's DNA inside Jaylen's basement. Bleach residue lined the walls. Her fingerprints were found on the doorknob, smeared, as if she'd reached for it, trying to escape. The medical examiner's timeline pinned the death between 7:40 and 8 p.m., minutes after her last text message to her sister. "I'll call you when I'm home." She never did. Holt spent long nights reviewing the footage. Frame by frame, she watched the SUV pass under the toll camera, Carla driving, Jaylen in the passenger seat. His head turned away from her, looking out the dark window. In that single moment, frozen in grainy black and white, they were not mother and son, not family, not protectors. They were two people bound by a secret too heavy to carry, and that secret was starting to break. In the holding cell, Jaylen stopped eating. He spent hours staring at the wall, whispering to himself. Other inmates said he sometimes cried out in the middle of the night. Not words, just sounds, as if reliving something he couldn't erase. Carla, on the other hand, tried to control the narrative. She told guards she wanted to speak to reporters. "People need to hear my side," she said. But when cameras arrived, she froze, eyes darting, hands shaking. The brave front cracked, revealing the guilt beneath. On October 17, 2025, the courtroom in Wayne County, Michigan, was packed. The air buzzed with whispers, reporters, and the faint metallic clink of handcuffs. Jaylen entered first, thinner, pale, eyes empty. Carla followed, dressed neatly, her expression unreadable. They sat side by side, yet there was a distance between them, like two strangers bound by tragedy. When the judge read the charges, second-degree murder and evidence tampering, the words echoed off the wood-paneled walls. Lana's family sat in the front row, their faces stone. The prosecutor began outlining the timeline, April 5th to April 26th. The lies, the bleach, the bin. Each word carved deeper into the air until the room felt smaller, heavier. When asked for their pleas, Jaylen hesitated. Then, softly, "Not guilty." Carla whispered the same. A gasp rippled through the courtroom. Lana's mother buried her face in her hands. Outside, cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions that no one wanted to answer. But inside, Detective Holt sat quietly at the back, notebook in hand. She'd done her part, found the truth. But in her chest, the weight didn't lift. Because sometimes justice doesn't feel like victory. It just feels like loss, wearing a badge. That night, the streets of Riverton looked the same as before. Same porches, same soft lights. But for those who lived there, nothing would ever be the same again. A 17-year-old girl's laughter had vanished. And in its place, silence, guilt, and the echo of a mother's fatal choice. The air inside Fairmont County Jail felt heavy, a mix of bleach, sweat, and silence. Jaylen Parker sat on the lower bunk, his back pressed against the cold wall, eyes unfocused. The days had begun to blur into one another. Same walls, same meals, Same thoughts circling in his head like vultures. He wasn't sleeping anymore. Every time his eyes closed, he saw her, Lana, standing in the basement, her voice trembling, her hands reaching toward him. The memory replayed like a broken record that wouldn't stop. Sometimes he talked to her in whispers. "You said you'd stay," he murmured. "Why did you make me do this?" Across the cell block, voices rose and fell. Laughter, arguments, the clatter of metal trays. But inside Jaylen's cell, time moved slower. Every sound, every shadow reminded him of the night that changed everything. He thought about his mother, Carla, how she used to call him my golden boy, how her voice used to make him feel safe. Now, all he could think about was how she looked that night, calm, determined, eyes sharp with fear and love twisted together. They hadn't spoken since the arraignment. The court had separated them, no communication allowed. But in his head, her voice never stopped. "I'll fix this, baby. I'll fix everything." In the women's holding facility across town, Carla Parker was learning what it meant to be alone. She kept her head down, avoided the others, spent her days writing letters she wasn't allowed to send. Most of them started the same way. "Dear Jaylen, I still believe you didn't mean it," the other inmates whispered when she passed. Some pitied her, others despised her. "That's the woman who helped her son hide the body," one voice said once, loud enough for her to hear. Carla didn't flinch. She'd already punished herself more than anyone else could. At night, she lay awake replaying every decision she'd ever made, every moment she could have stopped him, every word she could have said. The image of Lana's face haunted her, pale and still, her hair spread across the basement floor. She remembered thinking, "She's just a child." And then the guilt came, fast and merciless. Meanwhile, outside those walls, the media frenzy had grown. Reporters swarmed the courthouse steps. Headlines screamed betrayal, madness, and obsession. Talk shows speculated about the mother-son killers. The story had become larger than life, feeding the internet's endless appetite for tragedy. Every photo, every rumor, every grainy image was dissected. But behind those headlines were real people, grieving, breaking. Lana's family was still trapped in the same nightmare, trying to make sense of what couldn't be understood. Her mother, Denise, gave one interview, just one. Sitting in her living room surrounded by photos of her daughter, she said quietly, "I just want people to remember her as she was. Not as a headline, not as a victim. She was sunshine." Detective Marissa Holt watched that interview on a flickering TV inside her office. She turned the volume down and stared at the screen, thinking about how cases like this never really end. Not for the victims, not for the families, not even for the detectives. She'd spent months trying to understand what had driven Carla and Jaylen. Love, fear, control, none of it added up. But she'd come to one conclusion. Sometimes love, when warped by obsession and guilt, becomes unrecognizable. She closed her notebook, the words "final report" scrawled on the cover. But even as she tried to move on to the next case, she couldn't stop thinking about the moment Carla said, "A mother protects her child." By early winter, the trial had begun. Snow fell outside the courthouse in thick, silent waves, muffling the chaos within. Jaylen entered first, his wrists chained, his eyes hollow. Carla followed, still composed, but thinner now, the color drained from her face. The prosecution opened with a timeline that painted a clear, merciless picture. Lana arrived at Jaylen's house on April 5th. She never left. For weeks, both defendants lied to police, deleted messages, fabricated stories. The forensics were undeniable. When the prosecutor showed the jury photos of the plastic bin, Carla closed her eyes. Jaylen stared at the floor. Then came the recordings. Phone calls, text messages, voicemails, pieces of their panic stitched together like broken glass. One message stood out above all, Carla's voice whispering, "We'll take care of it." No one has to know. The jury didn't flinch. During cross-examination, Jaylen's lawyer tried to argue emotional instability, that Lana's breakup pushed him into a moment of uncontrolled panic. But the courtroom wasn't buying it, and Carla's defense that she acted only out of maternal instinct drew empathy, yes, but not forgiveness, because hiding a body wasn't protection. It was participation. Outside the courthouse, people gathered in the cold, holding candles. Some prayed for Lana. Others whispered about what could drive a mother to such extremes. One woman told a reporter, "You don't expect evil to look like your neighbor, but sometimes it does." Inside the jail, Jaylen stopped writing letters. The guilt had hollowed him out completely. When his lawyer asked how he felt about the trial, he said quietly, "It doesn't matter what happens now. She's gone. I'm already done." Carla, on the other hand, couldn't stop writing. Every page was filled with apologies, to Lana's family, to the world, to her son. She'd write the same line again and again. If love had a limit, maybe she'd still be alive. Days turned into weeks. The prosecution rested. The defense faltered. And soon, it was time for closing statements. The prosecutor stood, voice firm, unwavering. "This case is not about love," she said. "It's about control. It's about what happens when people mistake possession for affection, when protection becomes destruction." Those words hung in the air like smoke. When it was the defense's turn, Carla's attorney asked the jury for compassion. She did what mothers do. She tried to help her child, but she lost herself in the process. Tears ran down Carla's cheeks as she listened. Jaylen didn't look at her. When the judge dismissed the jury to deliberate, the room emptied slowly. Outside, snow was still falling, covering the courthouse steps in white, erasing footprints as fast as they appeared. Inside their holding cells, mother and son waited, two souls bound not by blood anymore, but by the weight of a choice that could never be undone. For Carla, the silence was unbearable. She whispered prayers she barely believed in. For Jaylen, there was only one sound: Lana's laughter, echoing faintly somewhere in the dark corners of his mind. Snow drifted past the courthouse windows that morning, soft and soundless. Inside, the lights were too bright. Every whisper seemed to bounce off the marble walls and die before reaching the ceiling. Jaylen Parker sat at the defense table, hands folded, wrists trembling. His mother, Carla, sat beside him. Between them, inches of work and years of regret. The jury filed in, eyes down, faces unreadable. 12 strangers carrying the weight of a choice that would haunt them all. The bailiff called for silence. The judge's voice cut through the tension like a blade. Has the jury reached a verdict? A woman in the front row, Lana's sister, clutched a folded photograph to her chest. Carla saw it and flinched. That single image hurt more than any sentence ever could. The foreman rose. "We have, Your Honor." On the charge of second-degree murder, the foreman read, "We find the defendant guilty." No one moved. The word hung in the air, heavy and final. The sound of muffled sobs broke the stillness. Carla didn't cry. She just closed her eyes. Jaylen lowered his head, whispering something no one could hear. Maybe a prayer. Maybe Lana's name. The judge's gavel struck once. Order. The second verdict came moments later. Evidence tampering. Guilty as well. Then silence again. The kind that feels endless. When court adjourned, the room emptied slowly, as though no one wanted to disturb the ghosts that lingered. Reporters surged toward the doors, cameras flashing, questions flying. Did you expect this outcome? Any remorse, Mrs. Parker? Why did you help him? Carla said nothing. The deputies led her away, wrists bound, eyes forward. Jaylen followed, every step echoing. For the first time, he didn't look back at his mother. Whatever bound them had broken the moment the verdict fell. Outside, the sky had turned the color of ash. Snowflakes melted as they touched the courthouse steps. Lana's family stood together under a single umbrella, holding one another as the world moved on around them. Justice, if that's what this was, felt cold and incomplete, because nothing could bring her back. Weeks later, Jaylen adjusted to the rhythm of prison life, the clang of doors, the endless counts, the same gray meals. He kept to himself, head down, avoiding fights and noise. Some nights, he wrote, small scraps of paper filled with fragments of memory, the way Lana laughed, the way she said his name. He never signed them, never sent them, just folded them carefully and tucked them beneath his mattress, like prayers to a God who'd stopped listening. He thought about his mother often, but couldn't bring himself to write her. How could he? Every word would taste like blame. Carla spent her days in the library, shelving books no one read. She moved slowly now, her body carrying the exhaustion of years she hadn't lived yet. Some of the younger inmates called her Mom. It made her smile sometimes, small, fragile smiles that never reached her eyes. One afternoon, the chaplain found her staring out the window at the gray yard beyond the fence. "You thinking about him?" he asked. She nodded. "Every second." "Have you written?" "I tried," she whispered. "But I don't know what to say anymore." I told myself I did it for love. But love isn't supposed to destroy everything it touches. The chaplain said nothing. He just placed a hand on her shoulder and left her to the silence. Months passed. Outside those walls, the story faded from headlines, replaced by newer tragedies. But in Riverton, memories lingered like ghosts that refused to leave. The Parker house stood empty now, its windows boarded, grass growing wild. Teenagers dared each other to peek inside, whispering about the basement that keeps secrets. No one stayed long. Detective Marissa Holt drove by sometimes on her way home. She'd stop at the curb, engine idling, staring at the dark windows. It wasn't part of her job anymore. She had new cases, new victims, but something about that house always pulled her back. She once told a colleague, "It's not the crime that stays with you, it's the why." And the why, she realized, might never be answered. A year later, mother and son met again. Their first visit since sentencing. The guard escorted Carla to the glass partition. Jaylen was already seated on the other side, thinner now, eyes older. For a moment, neither spoke. The static hum of the phone between them filled the air. Then Carla picked up the receiver. "Hi, baby." Jaylen hesitated, then lifted his. "Hi, Mom." They both smiled weakly, unsure what to say. The silence stretched. "I've been writing," she said. "Letters I can't send." He nodded. "Me too." Carla's eyes welled up. "I used to think I could fix anything. When you fell off your bike, when you failed a class, when you lost friends. I always said, Mom will fix it. But this, I can't fix this." Jaylen looked down, voice trembling. "I'm sorry." She shook her head slowly. "You're my son. I'll always love you. But sometimes love has to learn how to let go." The guard tapped the glass. 5 minutes left. Carla pressed her hand against the partition. Jaylen mirrored it, palm to palm, separated by glass and everything that had gone wrong. In that moment, the world was quiet again. No reporters, no courtroom, just a mother and her son, bound by guilt, separated by truth. When the guard led them away, Carla turned once more. "Do you still dream about her?" she asked. Jaylen paused at the door. "Every night." Years later, Riverton learned to breathe again. The case became a cautionary tale whispered in classrooms, a headline buried in archives. People moved on, but the echoes stayed, the way tragedies always do. Detective Holt retired early, moved to the coast. Sometimes she'd walk along the shoreline at dusk, watching the tide erase footprints. She thought of Lana, of Jaylen, of Carla. 3 lives tangled in a moment that could never be undone. Love, she decided, was like the ocean, beautiful, endless, and capable of pulling you under if you weren't careful. Carla spent her final years quietly, helping other inmates learn to read. Jaylen served his sentence, aging into someone quieter, gentler, haunted. When he was finally released on parole, he didn't return to Riverton. He went somewhere no one knew him, somewhere the past couldn't follow. People said he worked with troubled youth, teaching them about choices, about anger, about love that hurts. And sometimes, late at night, when the wind moved through the trees, neighbors swore they could hear a woman's voice, soft, almost forgiving, whispering from somewhere unseen, "Be better, my boy."